Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be answering a question that somebody asked on one of the other videos, where they have a typical scenario where you will be connecting to a source database, but a source database that you don't have any access to amend, and their scenario is one where you would want to be doing an incremental or a delta load every day, but you don't want to have to scoop all of the data out of the source database. So really you want to be able to query that database and put in some filters or where clauses. So in this video I'm going to show you how you can do that in ADF. So let's get started on that, and the first thing I'll show you is just some sample data that I've set up. So I've created a source schema. I've created this customer registrations table, and I've loaded some default data into it. So if you imagine this is our source database, and the important thing here is our registration date. So I've got a number of different registration dates here. So the scenario we're going to go with is where we just maybe want to pull the last 30 days worth of data, for example. Typically you might want the last day's worth, depends on how frequent your ETL cycle is, but just giving you a way to filter that data. So if we jump over to ADF now, and I will just go and rename this version of the dynamic query, and we'll go and create a new one. So let's go and create a new pipeline, and we're going to call this one dynamic query. And in here, the first thing we're going to do is actually create a variable, and I'll explain why it will become apparent why we're doing that in a minute. So if we have a set variable container, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. Alright. Oh, sorry. Apologies. Let me create a variable on the pipeline first. So we will call this, let's call it high watermark. That's going to be a string, and we're not going to have a default value for it. So now that we've created our value, we can set that variable. And typically what you would do in a production system is you would have your latest extract dates held in a metadata table so that you can read those into your pipeline. So the last time it ran, you get your upper date from there, and then you can get dates between, your data between two date windows. So now that I've got my high watermark, I can actually set a value for it. And what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to create a SQL statement. So it's going to be a really rudimentary one, but if we just do a select star from our source table, which is source customer registrations, if we just start with that, what we can do now is a little bit of testing with that. So if we just stick a lookup in here and reference that variable. So our source data set is coming from my demo DB, and I've got a static and a dynamic connection here, and I'll show you, we'll use both of these later in the tutorial or in the video. But you will see more on these in some of the earlier videos. So we're going with our static demo DB, and we're going with a query. And our query, if we go and add some dynamic content, is going to use our variable. So there's our variable. And the one thing we want to do if we're using a lookup is we're not interested in just the first row, we want all of our results back. So let's untick that. And if everything works, then we will get our full list of customers back, because that table is already populated in my database. So now I can look at the output from the lookup, and it's given me 5 records, and these are all the records from our database, so brilliant. So let's go and adjust our variable and actually make it dynamic, because it's just a straight select at the moment. So if we now add a where clause, and we're going to say where our registration date is greater than, and then we build up our syntax here. So what we're saying is we're going to use the add days function, and I'm just going to go and fetch the current time using the UTC now function, and then I'm just going to say I want the last 30 days. So that's basically adding days minus 30 days from the current day, and then we're going to close that, close the quotes, and hopefully this is going to give us a dynamic query. So if we run in debug again, so let's have a look at our output now. We've got 2 rows. We've got one from the registered on the 1st of April and one registered on the 24th of April, which is today. So if we just go and check against our customer registrations table, so initially we had 5 records in the set, there's 5 records there, and now because we're looking at any registrations in the last 30 days, it's just picking up these 2 records. So far so good. And really, in terms of a dynamic query, it's all about that little bit of syntax that you had in the set variable. So it's definitely something you can do. In terms of what we're doing here, what I'm going to do is just do a simple copy command to show you loading that into the data warehouse or the system that I've got on my end. So I've only used the lookup really here for debug purposes, so I can see the output of it. But now I know that, I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm going to replace it with a copy command. So we've got our variable, we're going to copy our data. So our source is going to be our static demo DB dataset, and exactly the same way as we did in the query, in the lookup, we're using the query, adding dynamic content, and we're going to use our high watermark. And now we know that query works, so we're happy to use it in our copy command. And now for the sync or the destination, I'm actually going to be using my dynamic DemoDB connection, and this allows me to specify which table and schema I want this data to go into. So if I create a new table called dbo.customer registrations, or in fact let's call it new customer registrations, sorry, I've already preempted my schema there in the table name, but I need to apply that in the schema name. So the schema is DBO. It's going to go to new customer registrations. If I just go and quickly check here and just refresh my tables. So the table doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to set it to create as part of this. And then, so my table option, I'm just going to change to auto create just for this example. So we've got our source and we've got our sync. So now if we try and load that data through, we have succeeded. We can look at our output here and just see that we've read 2 rows, we've written 2 rows, which all sounds good so far. If we go and look and refresh our tables list in Management Studio, here's our new customer registrations. If we select our rows there are the 2 records that we're expecting. So it's actually really simple once you know the syntax to perform this dynamic query. And for me, really, that is the challenge in ADF, is just knowing the syntax and being able to use the debug features to see what's coming out of the queries or the components that you're executing. So the last thing I'm going to show you here is those 2 datasets that I spoke to you about. So the first one is our static dataset, and that is just connecting straight out of the box to our DemoDB connection. So I haven't set up any parameters, I haven't set a table, it's just a completely vanilla connection string. Our next one is a dynamic connection string. So here I've got two parameters set up, and in terms of the connection there you can see I'm specifying the table or the schema.table name referencing those two parameters. And it's probably easier for me to just create a new version to show you how that works. So if I say create new data set, we're going to our Azure Database. We're going to our linked service. We'll call it, let's keep it consistent with my naming, DS Demo DB Dynamic 2, nice and original there. The table name we leave as none, we don't make any changes here. So that's our new connection set up. So that's exactly the same as our static one at the moment, but if we go and create our parameters here of table name and schema name, both of which are strings, and then on the connection where we've got the table, we can actually go and edit this, and we can add our dynamic content to say this is the table I want to use, and I want to use schema name dot table name. And that is exactly the same setup as our dynamic data set. So it basically means, as we've seen, that you can decide where you're loading data into, be it an existing table or a new table. And I've used those, or this dynamic data set throughout the previous videos where we're doing all of our dynamic loads. So that is the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at the dynamic query functionality there. If you do have any questions, any thoughts on anything ADF related, please give me a shout and I'll do my best to explain it. But I hope everybody stays safe, and I will see you all next time. Thank you.